a guy over in Europe by the name of Giuseppe Mazzini, who was the revolutionary leader. And Giuseppe Mazzini also happened to be the founder of the Mafia. This letter that he wrote to Giuseppe Mazzini on August 15 of 1871 outlined 3 world wars. And the first of those world wars was to be fomented between the differences between the German nationals and the Brits, and end up with the downfall of Tsarist Russia and the rise of communism. Any of us who studied any history at all knows that's exactly how World War I took place. And in World War II, Israel was to be born. And the Zionists were given power. So since the first 2 wars came off just exactly as that letter said, and that letter used to hang right in the British Museum Library until 1977 when Baron Rothschild became a director. And as soon as he was on the board of directors, that letter disappeared from the library. Immediately. But since that letter so clearly delineated the first 2 world wars, I think we have to look at it seriously and take it to heart when it says in there so clearly that the 3rd World War will be fomented between the Zionists and Islam. Does anybody see that materializing today? Every place we look.
Allies will do anything they can to prevent authentic democracy in the Arab world. The reason is very simple. Across the region, an overwhelming majority of the population regards the United States as the main threat to their interests. In fact, opposition to U.S. policy is so high that a considerable majority think the region would be more secure if Iran had nuclear weapons. In Egypt, the most important country, that's 80%. Similar figures elsewhere. There are some in the region who regard Iran as a threat, about 10%. Well, plainly the U.S. and its allies are not going to want governments which are responsive to the will of the people. If that happens, not only will the U.S. not control the region, but it'll be thrown out. What about Egypt, the most important country, but not a major center of oil production? Well, in Egypt and Tunisia and other countries of that category, there is a game plan which is employed routinely, so commonly it takes virtual genius not to perceive it. But when you have a favored dictator, for those of you who might think of going into the diplomatic service, might as well learn it. When there's a favored dictator and he's getting into trouble, support him as long as possible, full support as long as possible. When it becomes impossible to support him, like say maybe the army turns against him, business class turns against him, then send him off somewhere. Issue ringing declarations about your love of democracy, and then try to restore the old regime, maybe with new names. And that's done over and over again. It doesn't always work, but it's always tried. Somoza, Nicaragua, Shah in Iran, Marcos in the Philippines, Duvalier in Haiti, Chun in South Korea, Mobutu in the Congo, Ceausescu is one of Western favorites in Romania, Suharto in Indonesia. It's completely routine. And that's exactly what's going on in Egypt.
Syria is an opportunity for us because Syria plays an important role in the Middle East, particularly right now. Syria is Iran's only ally in the Arab world. It's their route to the sea. It's the route for them to arm Hezbollah in Lebanon, which threatens, of course, our ally, Israel. And so seeing Syria remove Assad is a very high priority for us. We need to make sure as well that we coordinate this effort with our allies, in particular with Israel. But the Saudis and the Qatari and the Turks are all very concerned about this. They're willing to work with us. We need to have a very effective leadership effort in Syria, making sure that the insurgents there are armed.
And so everything we're doing in consultation with our partners in the region, including Israel, which obviously has a huge interest in seeing what happens in Syria, coordinating with Turkey and other countries in the region that have a great interest in this.
What happened in 9/11 is we didn't have a strategy, we didn't have bipartisan agreement, we didn't have American understanding of it, and we had instead a policy coup in this country. A coup. A policy coup. Some hard-nosed people took over the direction of American policy, and they never bothered to inform the rest of us. I went through the Pentagon 10 days after 9/11. I couldn't stay away from Mother Army. I went back there to see Don Rumsfeld. I'd worked for him as a White House fellow in the 1970s, all this in the book. And I said, am I doing okay on CNN? He said, yeah, fine. He said, I'm thinking about it. He says, I read your book, and he said, it's a book that talks about the Kosovo campaign. And he said, I just want to tell you, he said, nobody's going to tell us where or when we can bomb. Nobody. He said, I'm thinking of calling this a floating coalition. What do you think about that? He said, well, sir, thanks for reading my book. And, he said, thanks, that's all the time I've got. Really? And I went downstairs, I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office, and he said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. He said, but I guess they don't know what to do about terrorism, and so they think, but they can attack states, and they want to look strong, and so I guess they think if they take down the state, they can terrorists. You know, it's like that old saying he said, only two halves of hammer, you have a problem. Well, I walked out of there pretty upset, and then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that, for sure. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later, and I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? Are we still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. I said, 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is that a classified memo? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me. He was about to show it to me. He said, because I don't want to talk about it. And I sat on this information for a long time, for about 6 or 8 months. I was so stunned by this, I couldn't begin to talk about it. And I couldn't believe it would really be true, but that's actually what happened. These people took control of the policy in the United States.
Türkiye Masonları açısından çok önemli bir yıl olmuştur. İlk defa Mason mabetlerinde gizli çekimler gerçekleştirilmiş ve bu görüntüler Kanal 7 televizyonunda günlerce yayınlanmıştı. 2 ayrı locada çekilmiş olan gizli kamera görüntüleri hem Türk halkını hem de yüksek derecelere ulaşmamış Masonları şoke etti. 1738 yılında İstanbul'da kurulan ilk locadan bu yana gizliliğini koruyarak gelen Masonların görüntülerinin deşifre edilmesi ve Masonluğun gerçek yüzünün gözler önüne serilmesi günlerce konuşuldu. Adayları tanıdınız.
Serdar Büyüküstün, mesleği elektrik mühendisi. Aykut Erensoy, mesleği elektrik mühendisi. Kenan Ali Akman, mesleği serbest ticaret.
Adayların kimlikleri anlaşıldı. Onları içeri aldınız. Sayın baylar, her şeyden önce bize söz vermenizi istiyoruz. Aramıza alınmanız kabul edilse de edilmese de, bizim düşünce odası dediğimiz o karanlık bölgeye girdiğiniz andan başlayarak, şu ana kadar görüp işittiklerinizi ve bundan böyle burada işiteceklerinizi, gözleriniz açıldıktan sonra da göreceklerinizi hiç kimseye söylemeyeceğinize namusunuz ve onurunuz üzerine söz verir misiniz? Sayın Aykut Erensoy,
Evet, söz veririm.
Sayın Serdar Büyüküstün,
Söz veririm.
Sayın Kenan Ali Akman,
Evet, söz veririm.
soruşturucu kardeşim adayları oturtunuz. Sayın Serdar Büyüküstün, göğsünüze dayanan ve bir elinizle size yoklatılan şeyin ne olduğunu söyler misiniz?
Metal bir parça. Kılıç.
Sayın Aykut Erensoy, göğsünüze dayanan ve bir elinizle size yoklatılan şeyin ne olduğunu söyler misiniz?
Kılıca benziyor.
Kılıcın göğüslerinize dayandırılması, verdiğiniz sözde durmazsanız yaşamınız boyunca pişmanlık duyacağınızı ve acı çekeceğinizi bildirir. Herhangi bir yanlış anlamaya yer kalmaması için şunu da öğrenmek isteriz. Aramıza girmek isteyen kişi gerçekten siz misiniz? Sayın Aykut Erensoy, Mason olabilmek için size verilen başvuru formunu hiçbir etki, baskı altında olmaksızın salt kendi istem ve buyurultunuzla siz mi doldurup imzaladınız?
Evet.
Adayların birinci yolculuğu yapmalarını sağlayınız. Kimdir onlar? Gerçek ışığı arayan adam. Az önce okunan anda şimdi benimle birlikte tekrar ediyoruz. Evrenin ulu mimarı simgesiyle burada bulunan Mason topluluğu önünde kendi istek ve buyruğumla içtenlikle dolu olarak söz veriyorum.
Evrenin ulu mimarı simgesiyle burada bulunan Mason topluluğu önünde kendi istek ve buyruğumla içtenlikle dolu olarak söz veriyorum.
Bana söylenilecek ve gösterilecek Mason gizemlerini bir Mason'dan başkasına ve Mason hocasından başka bir yerde açıklamayacağım.
Bana söylenilecek ve gösterilecek Mason gizemlerini bir Mason'dan başkasına ve Mason hocasından başka bir yerde açıklamayacağım.
Masonların amaçları doğrultusunda çalışacağım.
Masonların amaçları doğrultusunda çalışacağım.
Özgür Masonlar Büyük Hocası'nın ilkelerine bağlı kalacağım.
Özgür Masonlar Büyük Locası'nın ilkelerine bağlı kalacağım.
Üyesi olacağım hocanın toplantılarına düzenli olarak katılacağım.
Üyesi olacağım locanın toplantılarına düzenli olarak katılacağım.
Birinci Nazır kardeşim adaylar için ne istiyor?
Bilimsel gerçeğin ışığını saygıdeğer üstad.
Doğruyu ve bütün sütunları süsleyen kardeşlerim adaylar için ne istiyor?
Bilimsel gerçeğin ışığını saygıdeğer üstad.
Çekici üçüncü duruşunda bilimsel gerçeğin ışığı verirsin. Uçları size çevrilmiş bulunan kılıçlar bundan sonra yaşamınız saldırıya uğrarsa